Come, sit down, dear, and rest your weary thoughts. Let the world fade for a little while. Let the hum of worries drift away like leaves on a quiet stream. Tonight, I'll take you somewhere unusual, a place where the ordinary folds into the extraordinary, where time bends gently, and memories, both bright and shadowed, find their voices again. Imagine a train, old and quietly humming, waiting just beyond the reach of your everyday world. Its doors open not for schedules or maps, but for hearts ready to wander, to remember, and perhaps to discover something they've long forgotten. Inside, the seats are soft. The air carries the scent of cedar and old stories, and the gentle sway beneath your feet feels like a lullaby for the soul. Passengers arrive, strangers and familiar faces alike, each carrying fragments of lives once lived or moments tucked away in corners of memory. Outside, the world blurs forests, villages, and streets that shimmer with echoes of the past. Every stop on this journey offers wonder, reflection, and a touch of magic. So breathe, dear one, let your mind rest. The train is ready, the night is quiet, and the story is just beginning. The night was unusually quiet for a train station at the edge of town. Or perhaps it was simply that no one else seemed to exist. Street lamps flickered in lazy intervals, casting puddles of light across the empty platforms. The lone traveler, wrapped in a heavy woolen coat, carried a small satchel that clinked faintly with what might have been books, a journal, and a brass compass. He, or perhaps she, for the shadows made identities uncertain, walked along the platform with a kind of deliberate hesitation, as if each step weighed both in time and thought. There, at the very end of the platform, a train appeared out of nowhere. It wasn't announced. No arrival bell rang, and yet the distant whistle cut through the night, hollow and inviting. Its cars were old, painted in a deep green, with streaks of rust tracing down the metal-like veins. The windows were fogged and dim, revealing nothing but vague silhouettes inside. Steam hissed from the undercarriage, curling upward and fading into the mist. It felt alive, almost breathing, as though it had been waiting for someone exactly like the traveler. As the traveler approached, the air changed, thicker, warmer, with a faint scent of cedar and something indefinably sweet, like memories half remembered. The wheels squealed lightly as the door slid open, revealing the interior. Dust motes floated in the muted light, hanging in slow, lazy arcs like golden snow. Velvet seats lined the sides, faded to a deep, almost melancholic burgundy. The faint hum of something beneath the floor suggested movement already. Yet the train hadn't seemed to depart. Inside, the passengers were few but strangely distinct. A man in a three-piece suit hunched over a leather-bound journal, scratching furiously with a quill that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. A young girl, no older than 12, sat cross-legged on a seat, surrounded by sketches of maps and stars that seemed impossibly detailed, even though she claimed never to have visited these places. Further down the car, a woman with long, silver-streaked hair held a music box, opening and closing it at irregular intervals. Each note lingered, echoing softly and curving through the air in unusual patterns, as if the melody had its own gravity. The traveler hesitated near the door, unsure where to sit. A conductor appeared suddenly, stepping out from the shadows. He was tall, his uniform black as night, yet stitched with subtle threads that shimmered faintly when they caught the light. His eyes were piercing sharp, as a Hoxton seemed to see through the traveler entirely. "Ticket, please," he said, his voice smooth but layered with a resonance that made it feel as though it had traveled through decades before reaching the traveler's ears. The traveler fumbled in the satchel and withdrew a plain piece of card, embossed with characters that shimmered faintly as though dancing in a language the mind almost understood but refused to hold. The conductor nodded once, pocketed it, and vanished into the shadows before the traveler could ask a single question. The train lurched forward with a slow, deliberate grace. Outside, the world seemed to dissolve. Rolling hills passed by like painted scrolls, abandoned villages blurred at the edges, and distant forests shifted in shape as though they were breathing. Occasionally, a flicker in the corner of the traveler's vision suggested a figure on a porch or a window, only to vanish when looked at directly. There was no fear, only a tingling curiosity, the sense that every passing scene held a secret, meant just for them. Conversations began, soft at first, then forming hesitant patterns. Words were murmured, fragmented, like fragments of forgotten dreams. "I think I've been here before," whispered the man in the suit, though the look in his eyes betrayed confusion. The girl with the maps smiled faintly. "Maybe we all have, only we've forgotten." A ripple of unease passed through the car. Not fear, but something else. Recognition. Memories flickered like old film reels, sunsets that never existed, songs whose lyrics had vanished from the mind, places one felt they had walked in a dream but could never remember fully. The traveler felt it too, a sense that every item in the train, from the cracked pocket watch lying abandoned on a seat to the scattered photographs on the floor, had a story tied intimately to some moment of the past, even if that moment was not their own. An old suitcase rested in the aisle. It was worn, leather frayed, clasps tarnished. When the traveler brushed their fingers over it, a warmth spread like sunlight through their chest, and a single image bloomed in their mind. A crowded kitchen, laughter, a smell of bread baking, and a voice calling their name though they didn't recognize whose. They stepped back quickly, blinking. The vision vanished, leaving only the faint smell of cedar and the warm hum beneath the floorboards. As the train moved further into the unknown, the passengers' interactions became stranger. The woman with the music box began to hum softly, a melody that caused small lights to flicker along the ceiling. The man with the journal paused mid-word, his hand trembling as if someone else were writing alongside him. The girl with the maps traced the tip of her pencil over a star cluster, and suddenly a faint glow appeared in the page, outlining a constellation that should not exist in any sky. The traveler realized slowly, almost with reluctance, that the train itself was not merely moving through space. It moved through time, memory, and possibility. Every turn of the wheel, every squeal of the tracks seemed to echo something long past and long forgotten. Every passenger was a thread in a tapestry that had existed for lifetimes. And this night, this journey, was weaving them together once more. By the time the first half hour passed, the traveler noticed a subtle pattern. Objects, small, seemingly random objects, would appear where they had not been before. A torn photograph of a laughing child on a bench, a cracked watch with hands frozen at 3:17, a small glass vial containing something iridescent that shifted color in the handle. placed carefully as if awaiting discovery. Each item whispered a memory, sometimes joyful, sometimes sorrowful, always strangely intimate. The train slowed, not to stop, but in a way that suggested listening. Outside, a dim light flickered in the distance, shaping into the silhouette of a town. Fog rolled along the cobbled streets, drifting in and out of shapes like a living canvas. The traveler felt their heart quicken, not with fear, but with a sense of profound anticipation. The train had chosen its first destination as the doors opened, releasing a sigh of warm, mist-laden air. The traveler stepped onto the platform. Silence greeted them, but it was the kind of silence that hummed, like the pause before a symphony. The town awaited, and with it, the first unraveling of memories, the first confrontation with the forgotten, the first brush with the mysteries that lay hidden in the folds of time and mind. The traveler took a deep breath, feeling the cool night press against their cheeks. Somewhere deep in the mist, the faintest sound of laughter, childhood laughter, perhaps, or a memory not entirely their own code. And for the first time that night, the traveler smiled. They had stepped into a world that had been waiting for them, though they had not known it existed. The traveler settled into a velvet seat by the window, the fabric soft beneath fingers but worn at the edges, whispering decades of untold stories. The train hummed underfoot, a low, vibrating resonance that seemed to synchronize with the traveler's heartbeat. Outside, the darkness stretched like a vast canvas, dotted with distant, flickering lights, small villages, solitary cottages, or perhaps illusions crafted by the night itself. The other passengers had grown quieter, each lost in their own strange rituals. The girl with the maps traced her pencil along the intricate sketches, muttering numbers and directions that made no sense in any earthly geography. The man in the three-piece suit was now reading aloud from his journal, his voice hesitant but melodic, recounting fragments of lives that might have been lived elsewhere in some parallel memory. The silver-haired woman continued, turning the tiny crank of her music box, and each note now left trails of sparkling light in the air. Vanishing only moments after, the traveler's eyes fell on a small, cracked mirror leaning against the wall. Its glass shimmered faintly, reflecting not the train car, but glimpses of places that had existed only in half-remembered dreams. A playground bathed in golden afternoon light, a library stacked with books that had never been written, a bridge stretching across a fog-laden river that had no beginning and no end. Leaning closer, the traveler felt a faint tug, as though the mirror were inviting them into one of those memories. A soft, almost imperceptible sound came from beneath the floorboards. It wasn't a groan of metal or wood, but a rhythmic pulse-like, the slow beating of a heart. The traveler shifted in the seat, and suddenly the compartment seemed warmer, the shadows around the ceiling curling slightly, as if observing. A faint whisper carried through the air, brushing against the traveler's ear. "Do you remember?" The question was neither spoken aloud nor imagined. It felt like it came from the train itself, from the very air, from somewhere deep inside the traveler's own memory. Goosebumps rose on the arms as fragments of the past stirred faces forgotten, laughter half-remembered, moments that should have been lost but refused to be. The girl with the maps suddenly spoke, her voice a whisper that carried across the car. "The train doesn't just carry us, it carries everything we've left behind. Every memory, every regret, every small, quiet choice we forgot to notice it, all comes with us. The traveler looked at her, startled by the clarity of her insight. And what if we're not ready for it? Her eyes, unusually bright, the dim light met theirs. Then the train waits, or shows you anyway. It doesn't care if you are ready. You either learn or you carry the weight forever. Moments later, objects began to appear around the traveler, seemingly from nowhere. A broken pocket watch lay on the seat beside them, its hands spinning backward for a moment before stopping precisely at a time that felt eerily familiar. A photograph of a laughing child, one the traveler did not recognize, yet felt connected to, was pinned to the seat in front, and from the floorboards came a faint glow, a small brass key engraved with symbols that made no sense yet felt intimately important. A low creaking sound announced the slowing of the train. The lights flickered briefly, and the outside fog thickened, swallowing the distant hills and the faint glimmers of village lights. In the dim glow, the traveler could see a faint outline of a station emerging through the mist. Not a station of this world, not one that belonged to any map. They could sense that instinctively. The platform was long, empty, lined with benches that had moss creeping over them as though decades had passed in mere seconds. The passengers stirred, some rising to the doors, others clutching objects that had appeared, their expressions ranging from wonder to deep, unspoken trepidation. The girl with the maps walked slowly down the aisle, holding her sketches close to her chest. "This is the first town," she whispered. "Or perhaps it is not yet. It is what we carry inside. We must step carefully." As the doors slid open, with a soft sigh, the traveler's senses were flooded. The air smelled of damp stone, old books, and faintly of wood smoke. Lights shimmered in the fog lanterns that floated mid-air, glowing faintly like captured fireflies. And the silence profound, expectant. Silence pressed in, but not oppressively. It was the kind of silence that held secrets, but promised warmth if one dared to explore. The traveler stepped onto the platform, feeling the cobblestones shift slightly underfoot, soft, as though walking on clouds layered with earth. They realized that the first town was not just a place, it was an experience. Every step seemed to echo a memory, every shadow hinted at a story. The train waited silently behind, its cars stretching into the fog, holding passengers and fragments of forgotten times. A soft laughter echoed in the distance, almost like the memory of a friend long lost. The traveler turned slowly, unsure whether it belonged to the world outside or the one inside themselves. Somewhere beyond the mist, the faint outline of a child sketching maps was visible, and the traveler felt a curious pull toward understanding, toward discovery, toward the heart of whatever this journey was meant to reveal. And as they walked forward, the fog curling around their ankles, the train behind them hummed softly, a gentle promise resonating in the air. Every step matters, every memory counts, and nothing is ever truly forgotten. The train slowed gradually, its wheels whispering against the rails, as though reluctant to disturb the slumbering town ahead. Outside, a pale fog curled through the streets, drifting lazily along cobblestones, and creeping into doorways, as if seeking warmth. The traveler leaned against the doorway, the cool mist brushing their face, bringing with it a faint, unplaceable sense, something between wet earth, old books, and wood smoke. In that scent was a memory they didn't know they had lost. The platform, stretched out beneath dim, flickering lanterns, casting pools of amber light into the fog. No sound of modern life intruded here. No cars, no footsteps, no distant engines. Only the low hum of the train, breathing behind them, and the soft, irregular creak of timber in the town. The traveler stepped carefully onto the platform. Each footfall seemed heavier than normal, weighted with anticipation, as though the town itself measured their steps before permitting them forward. Shops lined the streets, their windows dusty but intact, revealing frozen snapshots of lives long past. A bakery displayed pastries that smelled impossibly sweet, as if the smell existed independently of the food itself. A tailor's shop contained half-finished garments, pins and threads scattered across the floor, the fabric stiff with age. In the silence, faint echoes of voices rose and fell, fleeting and intangible. Children laughing in the distance. An argument over a spilled cup of tea, a lullaby sung under a dim candle. Each echo seemed to respond to the traveler's thoughts, flickering in and out of clarity, forming patterns of recognition that were both unsettling and intimate. At the edge of a square, under the shadow of a crumbling clock tower, the traveler noticed her young girl crouched on the cobblestones, pencil in hand. Her sketches sprawled across thick sheets of parchment, maps of impossible places, streets and rivers that twisted and turned in ways that defied reason. Yet there was a familiarity in her drawings, a pull that seemed to resonate with something. Buried in the traveler's memory, "You shouldn't be here," the girl said softly, looking up. Her eyes were unusually bright, a piercing shade of green that seemed to see through fog and time alike. Or perhaps everyone should be. The traveler hesitated. I don't know if I belong here," they admitted. The words felt strange, almost fragile, spoken aloud as though in a dream. "Belonging is irrelevant," the girl said, turning back to her maps. "This town is not for finding yourself. It's for remembering what you lost, whether you knew it was gone or not." She tapped her pencil on the corner of a sheet, making the lines glow faintly. "But be careful. Some memories, some people, don't want to be remembered." As the traveler moved further into the town, the subtle strangeness grew more pronounced. Shadows did not always fall where they should. A tree's shadow curled across the street, as though reaching for something beyond the branches. Whispers rose and fell in the fog, guiding travelers toward hidden corners. An old wooden chest, half buried in leaves, a diary tucked into a windowsill, a locket lying on a bench. Each object seemed alive with intent, as if calling to those who had left pieces of themselves behind. The traveler reached out and touched the locket. Warmth spread through their fingers, and for a heartbeat, a fleeting memory returned a small hand in theirs, a shared laugh, a promise whispered under a tree they could no longer place. The train waited silently at the edge of town, its windows glowing faintly. It refused to leave, its patience absolute. It seemed to understand that the town required the travelers to confront themselves in ways they had not anticipated, and until they did, the journey would remain paused. The traveler sensed that the train itself had its own awareness, its own insistence on timing, rhythm, and moral reckoning. Further along the street, a crumbling cafe beckoned with warmth. The door creaked as the traveler entered, the smell of coffee or something similar, like roasted memories filling the air. A man sat at a table, his posture rigid, reading a newspaper whose date belonged decades in the past. His eyes flicked up as the traveler approached. "Ah," he said softly, turning a page, "you've arrived, finally." The traveler blinked. "You know me?" In a manner of speaking, he replied, gesturing vaguely to the room. "This town knows all who enter. It remembers what you have forgotten, but more importantly, it remembers what you wish to forget. That is the challenge." Stepping back outside, the traveler observed the town in new detail. Faded murals adorned walls, showing festivals long since vanished from living memory. A fountain at the square's center overflowed with water that shimmered unnaturally, reflecting the constellations above, as if the night sky itself had been drawn down into stone. The fog thickened here, twisting and curling to form faint, ghostly shapes. A cat that disappeared when looked at directly. A man carrying a basket of flowers that evaporated into mist. A laughing child who dissolved mid-step, leaving only the echo of joy. Curiosity pressed the traveler forward, deeper into alleys where the light barely reached. Here, the town's magic was undeniable. A shadow moved against the direction of its owner, silently urging them toward a half-collapsed building. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves, each holding objects lost in lives long past. A pair of gloves, a cracked teacup, a music box, playing a faint, sad melody. As the traveler handled these items, flashes of memory, joyful, sorrowful, and sometimes terrifying, passed through them. Faces of old friends, fleeting romances, regrets that had been buried deep, they all surfaced, demanding attention. Then, as the traveler stepped outside again, the town seemed to shift subtly. Streets had moved, doors led to different buildings. Windows revealed scenes previously unseen. It was a living puzzle, one that responded to observation, thought, and emotion. The traveler realized that walking here was like walking inside memory itself, mutable, fragile, and imbued with meaning. A faint bell tolled in the distance. The girl with the maps appeared again, holding a small telescope that gleamed like polished brass. "Do you see it?" she asked, pointing toward the sky. A rare constellation had emerged, one that seemed impossibly bright through the fog. Its stars aligned in a pattern that mirrored the town below. "The festival," she whispered. "It comes only when the stars say so. And when it comes, everything you face here will matter." The traveler felt a flutter of apprehension. Festival or no festival, the town had already tested them, through objects, through memories, through shadows that whispered and danced. Every choice, every glance, seemed consequential. Even the air felt thick with expectation, as though every inhalation pulled threads of destiny tighter in the square. Figures began to emerge, townsfolk, or perhaps echoes of them. Their forms flickered, sometimes human, sometimes only hints of humanity. One woman bent over a spinning wheel, her fingers deftly weaving a pattern the traveler could not decipher. A man swept the street, though the broom never seemed to touch the ground. A child ran along rooftops, laughing, before vanishing in a puff of mist. The traveler understood that these figures were not merely inhabitants, they were guides, tests, guardians, or perhaps reminders of paths taken or forsaken. Shadows grew longer as the night deepened. The traveler noticed one shadow behaving peculiarly. It moved independently, lingering near a small door, partially hidden behind ivy. Compelled, they approached, brushing aside the leaves. The door opened into a room filled with objects arranged on pedestals, letters tied with ribbon, photographs of unknown families, a small keyhole glinting in the dim candlelight. Each item called to the traveler, urging recognition, begging acknowledgement. And then, in the quietest corner, a journal lay open. Its pages were blank at first glance, but as the traveler leaned closer, words appeared, forming sentences as though being written in real time. To arrive is to remember. To leave is to understand. Every choice you make echoes beyond this town. The traveler realized the town was not simply a place to explore, it was a mirror, a reflection of every visitor's hidden self. Courage, curiosity, and memory were the currency here. To linger meant learning, to leave meant risking loss. And yet, the pull of the festival, the constellation in the sky, and the town's secrets beckoned irresistibly. The night wore on, and the traveler wandered deeper, encountering forgotten fragments. A child's toy lying in the gutter, a candle half-burned in a window, a music box playing a lullaby whose tune was familiar yet unplaceable. The town whispered continuously, guiding, testing, sometimes scaring, sometimes consoling. Every step forward felt simultaneously perilous and comforting, a paradox woven into the very stones beneath their feet. By the time the first hints of dawn began to pierce the fog, the traveler understood something profound. This town existed not merely in space or time, but in the nexus of memory itself. And every visitor, every passenger of the train, had to navigate it, not with maps, but with heart, mind, and the courage to confront what had been forgotten. As the traveler finally paused at the square once more, the girl with the maps knelt beside them, holding out a small brass compass. Its needle quivered, then settled, pointing not north, but toward the deepest memory each traveler carried. "Are you ready?" she asked. The traveler looked around at the fog-draped streets, the ghostly echoes of lives lived and lost, the whispering shadows, the objects of memory scattered like breadcrumbs. Their pulse quickened with anticipation and wonder. "Yes," they whispered, and with that, the first forgotten town embraced them completely, opening its secrets, its challenges, and its quiet, luminous magic to those willing to see beyond the veil of ordinary perception. The train rolled onward, a living entity that seemed to breathe in rhythm with the passengers' thoughts. After the quiet immersion in the first forgotten town, the traveler felt different, lighter in some moments, heavier in others, as though pieces of memory had been lifted and returned simultaneously. The foggy streets clung to the mind, weaving themselves into dreams that began before sleep. Yet the train hummed insistently, carrying them into landscapes that existed only between memory and imagination. The first thing the traveler noticed upon returning to the car was how alive it felt. The faded burgundy velvet of the seats, the warm cedar, since everything seemed aware of them. On a small table lay a stack of books, the topmost one open, as if waiting to be read. Beside it rested a torn scarf, frayed at the edges, humming faintly, almost breathing. Fingers brushing, it brought a flash of memory, laughter, wind over a summer field, but it vanished instantly, swallowed by the train. The other passengers were no less enigmatic. A storyteller, face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, leaned close. "The towns are alive," he said, voice curling like smoke. "They vanish when they are not needed, reappear when they are, and carry pieces of those who pass through them. Some return whole, some do not." A soft, scratching sound drew attention to a woman in the corner. Silent, precise, she sketched the passengers' faces, her pencil tracing not only their features, but possible futures and forgotten pasts. The traveler watched in fascination as some sketches flickered, eyes moving, lips curling, gestures shifting, hinting at lives that might have existed or might yet come to pass. Then a passenger approached, their gaze familiar in a way that tugged at memory. "I think I've seen you somewhere else," they said, voice tentative. "Perhaps a dream, or a fragment we shared." Words failed the traveler. Recognition and disbelief mingled, impossible to reconcile, yet undeniably real. Meanwhile, objects from the last town began appearing around the car. A golden music box played faintly, a torn scarf hummed with unseen energy. Books with cracked spines seemed to pulse in response to thought. The train, it became clear, was not just transporting people, it collected fragments of life, memory, and experience. Tension grew among passengers. "It's not right," one exclaimed. "You can't take things from these towns, their lives, not souvenirs." Another countered, "Better to carry them than to leave them to vanish forever." The train responded with a soft creak, as if acknowledging the debate. The storyteller intervened gently, "Careful. Every choice echoes here. Every object, every memory, it matters." Outside, landscapes shifted unpredictably. Misty forests gave way to decaying amusement parks. Ferris wheels frozen in rusted loops, roller coasters twisting into impossible shapes. Shadows moved independently, guiding, obscuring, testing. The traveler realized every glance and thought influenced the world. Objects appeared or disappeared, responding to emotion, curiosity, and fear. The silent woman's sketches became more vivid, predicting gestures and choices moments before they occurred. The traveler glimpsed themselves in reflections, older, younger, joyous, sorrowful, each flicker leaving behind a residue of unspoken thought. The floorboards thrummed with a low, almost conscious hum, vibrating through the seats and into the bones. The train was alive, aware, and guiding them gently, yet insistently. Small miracles occurred with increasing frequency. A letter appeared in the traveler's lap, written in ink that shimmered faintly, fading as quickly as it arrived. It contained words they felt they had longed to hear, but had never dared to speak. Confessions, apologies, promises, questions never asked. A photograph fluttered from the ceiling, showing a figure whose face was half-shadowed, half-glowing, smiling with a warmth that struck the traveler deep in their memory. Every object seemed to pulse with life, carrying fragments of story, fragments of self, fragments of others who had walked the same path. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes' time seemed irrelevant. The train, alive and conscious, carried them through landscapes that defied logic, realms that existed between sleep and wakefulness, memory and imagination. The storyteller recounted tales of towns that vanished overnight, towns whose streets disappeared under fog, whose inhabitants were erased if forgotten. The traveler realized that these were not just stories, but warnings. Each town held truths, tests and treasures, and to ignore them was to risk losing pieces of oneself. The hum under the floorboards grew louder, resonating through the seats and into the bones. It became impossible to tell where the train ended and where the journey began. Each passenger's secrets, silent regrets, hidden desires, unspoken fears were now tangible, manifesting in objects, reflections, and whispers. Arguments subsided into contemplation. Anger softened into wonder. The train was revealing more. Then scenery, it revealed the self, layer by layer, memory by memory. As the journey progressed, the traveler noticed a peculiar rhythm to the reflections in the windows. They began to glimpse fragments of the future, an interaction about to occur, a choice yet to be made, a confession soon to emerge. The silent woman's sketches began to incorporate these glimpses, merging past, present, and future into a single, intricate tapestry of faces and possibilities. The traveler realized with awe that the train was not merely transporting bodies. It was revealing truths, illuminating paths, and coaxing passengers to confront the layers of themselves they had long avoided. By the time the next faint glimmer of dawn threatened the horizon, the passengers had undergone subtle transformations. Bonds had formed quietly, without words, through shared glances, mirrored experiences, and whispered discoveries. Objects from forgotten towns rested beside them, tokens of lessons learned, memories reclaimed, insights earned. The traveler felt a deep, resonant understanding. The train's purpose was not to reach a destination in the usual sense. The stations, the landscapes, the townsfolk were stages, catalysts for revelation. What mattered most were the secrets uncovered, the fears faced, the courage summoned. And as the train continued into the uncharted night, the traveler leaned back in their velvet seat, allowing the hum of the floorboards, the flicker of reflections, and the soft breathing of the other passengers to envelop them. Each heartbeat, each memory, each revelation was a step deeper into themselves, a step closer to understanding that the journey had never been about where they were going, but about what they had always carried on, what they were finally willing to confront. In that quiet, magical hum of the train, the traveler understood the truth. The towns, the objects, the shadows, the whispers, they were not merely external curiosities. They were mirrors, lanterns, guides, and sometimes challenges. The train was less about transport and more about transformation, and the secrets that lay within every passenger, hidden truths, forgotten dreams, unacknowledged fears, were being drawn into the light, illuminated by the gentle, insistent, and inescapable magic of the midnight rails. By the time the train slowed to the faintest creak, signaling an approach to a place that could be the next forgotten town, the traveler felt the profound, serene exhaustion of revelation. The journey was far from over, yet something essential had shifted. The understanding that the train's true path lay not in geography, but in the intricate, often hidden landscapes of the human heart and mind. And with that knowledge, the traveler settled, eyes half closed, heart awake, ready for whatever truths the next stop. The train slowed without warning. There was no screech of brakes, no conductor's voice echoing through the carriages, no signal that this stop was approaching. The motion simply thinned, like a thought losing its urgency, until the rhythm of the wheels softened and dissolved into stillness. The sudden quiet felt unnatural, as though the world itself had paused mid-sentence. The traveler leaned toward the window. Outside, a town shimmered. At first glance, it seemed as though the buildings were carved from ice or polished stone. But the longer the traveler stared, the more unsettling the truth became. Every surface reflected light, not cleanly, not faithfully, but in fragments. Streets glimmered like sheets of glass. Towers rose high, their walls bending reality, folding sky into earth and earth into sky. Even the air felt reflective, as though thoughts themselves might bounce back if released too freely. The traveler caught their own face in the window, then caught it again and again. Their reflection multiplied across the glass, each version slightly altered. One looked more tired, one more alert. One carried a faint smile that the traveler did not remember forming. The train exhaled, the doors opened. A gentle but insistent settled deep in the traveler's chest. This was not curiosity, it was recognition. The kind that arrives without explanation and refuses to be ignored. The traveler stood and stepped onto the platform. The ground beneath their feet was solid, though it looked impossibly smooth, reflecting their shoes, their shadow, their hesitation. The reflection beneath them met their gaze, then blinked just a fraction of a second. Too late, the traveler froze. The reflection smiled. It was not hostile, not mocking, but it was not obedient either. It held the traveler's gaze with an intimacy that felt invasive, as though it knew something private and long buried. "Don't," the traveler whispered, unsure why. The reflection tilted its head, studying them, then slowly returned to mirroring every movement perfectly. Behind them, the doors slid shut. The traveler turned. The train was already pulling away. There was no rush of panic, no instinct to chase it. The traveler simply watched as it disappeared into the mirrored horizon, leaving behind a silence that felt deliberate. They were meant to be here. The streets of endless selves walking through the town felt like entering a dream where logic had been politely dismissed. Every building was a mirror, yet no two reflections behaved the same. Some were crisp and accurate, showing the traveler exactly as they were in that moment. Others distorted, subtly elongating limbs, sharpening features, softening expressions. Some reflections showed the traveler wearing clothes they had never owned, standing taller or slouching lower, eyes holding emotions they did not consciously feel. One reflection showed the traveler laughing. It stopped them cold. The laughter was silent, frozen in glass, but unmistakably real. The reflection's eyes were bright, unburdened, alive in a way that made the traveler's chest ache. They stared at it too long, searching their memory for a moment that matched that expression. Nothing came. The reflection faded as the traveler moved forward, replaced by another version, quieter, guarded, familiar. "So that's what I missed," the traveler murmured. The town echoed back the words, but warped them slightly, as if uncertain whether they were a statement or a confession. Footsteps echoed ahead. The traveler paused. A second later, their own foot struck the ground, perfectly aligning with the echo that had preceded it. The sound had arrived before the action, as though time itself were out of step. The further the traveler walked, the more this dissonance grew. Shadows moved independently of their owners. Reflections lingered after people passed. Objects vanished only to reappear behind them, rearranged without explanation. At the center of the town stood a wide square, circular and open, surrounded by mirrored benches and tall lampposts that reflected not light, but memory. The traveler sat, suddenly exhausted. They were not alone. Other passengers had arrived, some sitting silently, others pacing, a few staring into their reflections with expressions ranging from awe to despair. No one spoke at first. Words felt unnecessary, almost intrusive. Finally, an older passenger sat beside the traveler. "You feel it too," they said quietly. "Feel what?" The passenger gestured vaguely. "The weight of all the lives you didn't live." The traveler considered this. "I didn't know I was carrying them." The passenger smiled faintly. "We never do. Not until a place like this forces us to." "Stop." They stood and walked away before the traveler could ask anything more, their form dissolving into the mirrored crowd until they became indistinguishable from the reflections themselves. The townsfolk, who were never the same, twice the townsfolk, appeared gradually. They did not arrive from doors or streets, but seemed to step out of reflections, emerging where glass met glass. Their forms were unstable, faces shifting subtly with every movement, young, old, familiar, unfamiliar, sometimes all at once. Their eyes, however, were constant, clear, knowing. One approached the traveler near a mirrored fountain that poured not water, but light. "You are searching," the townsfolk said, their voice layered, as though several versions spoke in unison. "For a way out." The traveler replied honestly. "There is only one," the townsfolk said. The traveler exhaled. "I assumed that would be the answer." "You must face yourself," the townsfolk continued. "I've been doing that since I arrived." The townsfolk shook their head gently. "You've been observing. That is not the same thing." Another passed by, whispering as they went, "Regret makes excellent glass." The traveler frowned. "What happens if someone refuses?" The townsfolk's expression softened. "Then the town keeps them forever. For as long as it takes." The mirror, without a reflection. The alley was narrow and dark, tucked between two towering mirrored buildings. Unlike the rest of the town, it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. At the far end stood a single mirror, taller than the traveler, its surface dull and opaque. It showed nothing, no reflection, no distortion, just absence. The traveler approached slowly. As they drew closer, the surface rippled like disturbed water. A figure emerged, not a reflection, but a version. They stood face to face. This version of the traveler looked similar, yet unmistakably different. Their posture was relaxed, their eyes steady. There was a quiet confidence in the way they stood, a sense of ease the traveler did not recognize in themselves. "You took your time," the mirror self said. "I didn't know where I was going," the traveler replied. "That's never stopped you before." "What are you?" The mirror self smiled sadly. "I'm who you could have been." Images flickered across the mirror, moments the traveler remembered and moments they didn't. Conversations cut short, doors left unopened, choices made not out of fear, but out of comfort. "I did what I could," the traveler whispered. "I know," the mirror self said gently. "But you mistake endurance for fulfillment." The traveler's throat tightened. "Is this town here to punish us?" "No," the mirror self replied. "It's here to ask you something." "What if you were given another chance?" the mirror self asked. "Would you recognize it, or would you call it fate and let it pass?" The mirror cracked. Light spilled outward, dissolving the image until nothing remained. The traveler sank to the ground, shaking. The child who saw what others avoided night fell quickly, Stars appeared in the mirrored sky, reflections of constellations that did not exist. Lampposts glowed faintly, illuminating paths that seemed to appear only when one stood still long enough. That was when the traveler noticed the child. They sat at the edge of the fountain, feet dangling, tracing shapes in the reflective surface. "You're late," the child said. "Late for what?" "For understanding," the child replied. The traveler sat beside them. "What do you understand?" The child smiled. "Everyone's future." The traveler laughed softly. "That sounds exhausting." "It's lonely," the child corrected. "People don't like hearing what they already feel." "What do I feel?" The child studied them. "You feel like time betrayed you, did it?" "Time doesn't betray," the child said. "It only reveals." A bell rang, once, twice, then 13 times. The clock tower that bent time. The clock tower appeared at the edge of the square, tall and fractured. Its mirrored face split into countless segments. As the 13th chime echoed, the air thickened. Reflections began to move independently, scenes playing out within them like memories given form. The travelers saw themselves living lives they had never lived, staying when they had left, speaking when they had stayed silent, choosing courage over comfort. Passengers gathered, transfixed. Some reached out, others turned away. This was not temptation, it was clarity. When the final echo faded, time snapped back into place. The town grew quiet. Something within the traveler settled, not peace, but resolve. They understood now the town of mirrors did not exist to trap them. It existed to ensure they never walked blindly again. As dawn approached, the reflections softened, and the traveler rose, ready to leave, not because the exit had appeared, but because they had finally learned how to see. The train slowed gently this time, easing onto a platform that hummed with energy. Unlike the quiet stops before, this place vibrated with life even before the traveler stepped foot outside. From the moment they opened the door, the air was thick with warmth, scents, and sounds that seemed familiar yet impossible. Lanterns floated like stars, untethered, bobbing over streets lined with stalls, fountains, and wide open squares. Music echoed, but the instruments producing it were nowhere to be found. Soft strings, a distant flute, and drums that seemed to rise from the cobblestones themselves. Stepping down, the traveler felt the weight of anticipation. Every sense was assaulted yet calmed simultaneously, as if the town itself wanted to welcome them. Colors shimmered unnaturally. The ribbons on a stall twisted into patterns that reminded the traveler of childhood drawings. The lights of the lanterns pulsed to the beat of the invisible music. The streets were crowded with figures, passengers from the train mingling with townsfolk whose faces seemed familiar, though each one shifted subtly when looked at twice. The first stall caught the traveler's attention. On a table, delicate pastries gleamed, golden and perfumed, with scents that sparked forgotten memories. Honeyed biscuits that had disappeared from their childhood kitchen, caramel taffy pulled on. Summer afternoons, donuts coated in powdered sugar that melted on the tongue. The first bite caused a flicker, a memory rising like smoke from the back of their mind. A warm summer morning, the laughter of siblings echoing in a sunlit yard. Nearby, a carousel spun slowly. Its painted horses were frozen in time, yet their eyes glimmered with life. The traveler felt drawn to it without reason. As they climbed onto a stallion, the world shifted. Music swelled, and the rider found themselves not on the platform, but in a memory that had long been buried. Their first love, a fleeting encounter in the sunlight, shy smiles exchanged without words, hands brushing for a single moment that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now carried weight. Around them, the carousel spun endlessly, a kaleidoscope of small joys that had once been overlooked. The traveler dismounted, a warmth in their chest, and noticed a journal lying on the ground as though waiting for them. Opening it revealed words in a familiar hand, words they had written long ago, forgotten in the corners of their past. The festival pulsed with more than food and rides. Puppet shows played out in quiet squares, shadows dancing across walls that shimmered and shifted. Each puppet's story echoed the visitors' personal memories. A brother lost to distance and time, a sister whose laughter had faded from recollection, friends from a schoolyard long since abandoned. Watching, the traveler felt an ache deep inside, the bittersweet tug of nostalgia that both hurt and healed simultaneously. A masked ball unfolded in the town square. Guests moved gracefully, wearing masks that concealed and revealed simultaneously. Some masks reflected desires unspoken, others regrets carefully buried. The traveler hesitated at the edge, unsure whether to join. Then a hand, gloved in silver, extended. Tentatively, they accepted, and as the mask settled over their face, they glimpsed desires they had never admitted, even to themselves, ambitions once abandoned, fears once faced and left unresolved, dreams long hidden beneath the weight of routine. Faces in the crowd mirrored their own internal state: joy, longing, remorse, hope. And the traveler realized the ball was not just a dance, but a reckoning, a gentle confrontation with all the selves they carried inside. Objects appeared everywhere. Letters floated gently in the air, drifting down as if guided by invisible hands. Old photographs settled in their lap. Toys from long-lost childhood bedrooms whispered stories. Each passenger found personal relics. Some recognized them instantly. Others needed to touch and hold the objects to feel the memories stir. The traveler held a small brass key that had once opened a diary, now lost to time. Opening it, they saw pages filled with confessions, dreams, sketches, and poetry, past self-speaking across decades. They realized that the town offered choices, not merely glimpses, to carry these objects forward, leaving them behind, or to alter how they engaged with memory itself. The festival had a rhythm that defied time. Lanterns bobbed lazily along the streets, yet some lingered for hours in one place, illuminating events that would have passed unnoticed. Stalls served delicacies that morphed as the traveler tasted them. A cookie might bring tears of longing. A drink might evoke the courage of a moment once past. A savory bite might carry the laughter of a friend long gone. Music seemed to react to thought. A melody swelled as the traveler considered choices, softened when hesitation settled, and shifted into minor keys with memories of sorrow. A figure emerged from the crowd, the carnival master, cloaked in colors that changed like firelight eyes. Gleaming with quiet wisdom, they moved without sound. The traveler instinctively knew this was someone who had been waiting. "Welcome," the master said, "or perhaps welcome back." "Back?" the traveler asked, uncertain. "You are not the first to arrive, and you will not be the last," the master replied. "This festival repeats for those who cannot yet move on." Move on from what? The master gestured toward the crowd, toward the lights, toward the lingering music. From the fragments of your own life you have refused to see. From the choices you denied yourself. From the memories that weigh too lightly or too heavily upon you. The traveler glanced at other passengers. Some stood frozen, staring at objects, memories, playing like quiet films in their eyes. Some wept, some laughed. All were making decisions, which memories to carry, which to leave, which to confront, which to forgive. The carnival master moved closer, leaning slightly. Remember, this, they whispered, voice soft as silk. Every choice you make here changes the town itself. Leave one regret behind, and the street you walk will bloom with lanterns. Cling to a memory too tightly, and the fountain will overflow with light. Decide carefully, for the town listens. The traveler felt it a subtle shift in reality. Stall they had passed earlier glowed brighter when they remembered a kindness once given. A mask reflected a smile that had never been returned, then softened when they let it go. Objects floated differently depending on choice, responding not to desire but to acceptance. Hours seemed to pass, then collapse into minutes. The traveler walked through the festival like a thread weaving through an intricate tapestry of life. They found a puppet that mirrored their lost sibling, now offering forgiveness. A carousel horse carried a memory of first courage, small and fragile, yet undeniable. A journal dropped carelessly on a bench revealed dreams, abandoned but never erased. The traveler touched each object, each memory, not as a visitor, but as a participant, realizing the town existed not to entertain, but to illuminate, to reconcile, to guide. Tensions rose. Other passengers argued quietly. Some clung to objects, unwilling to release a piece of the past. Others raced to alter memories, reshaping how they remembered events long gone. The traveler observed, recognizing that choices made by one affected the flow of the festival, the movement of lanterns, the resonance of music. This town was alive, not just with magic, but with consequence. By nightfall, the traveler stood in the center of the square, surrounded by floating lanterns and invisible music. They held a handful of objects, a letter they had once written and forgotten, a small toy that had never been played with, a key to a diary long lost. They realized the festival did not demand action, it demanded acknowledgement. To accept the past was to reshape the present. To alter memory was to change the town. The carnival master appeared once more, leaning lightly against a floating lantern. Decide, they said. What will you carry forward? What will you leave behind? The traveler closed their eyes. They breathed choice, each memory, each echo of the past. They felt the pull of nostalgia, the ache of loss, the thrill of rediscovery. One by one, they made selections, not always easy, never perfect, but intentional. As each decision was made, the town shifted subtly. A lantern glimmered brighter. A fountain's reflection deepened. Music swelled, then softened. When the traveler finally opened their eyes, the carnival master smiled, vanished, or perhaps simply dissolved into the night. The festival continued around them, but the traveler felt different. They carried memories forward, not as chains, but as pieces of themselves, lessons, joys, regrets, and unspoken truths. The town pulsed, lanterns rising higher, music echoing further, carrying fragments of all who had passed through. The traveler realized then that this was the final test before departure, not merely to confront memory, but to actively choose how to live with it. The festival was not over. It never truly ended, but the traveler walked toward the train platform, the night soft around them, carrying within their heart the knowledge that memory, choice, and identity were not static. The town itself shimmered in quiet approval, ready to receive the next visitor, the next story, the next life in need of reckoning. And as the train waited, lanterns reflecting in the polished rails, the traveler knew one thing clearly: what they carried forward would shape every step of the journey yet to come. The train moved again, but the rhythm was different this time. It wasn't the same steady clatter of wheels over tracks, the familiar hum that had lulled passengers into a trance during the earlier journey. No, this ride had a new cadenza, gentle undulation, like breathing, like the pulse of something alive. The cars seemed warmer, more intimate, as though the train itself recognized the passengers and had decided to embrace them, rather than merely carry them. The traveler sat back in the velvet seat, noticing the changes immediately. Items from previous towns, small, impossible fragments, had found their way here. A music box from the forgotten town whispered a melody only the traveler remembered. A torn scarf from the town of mirrors had draped itself casually across another passenger's lap, as if it knew exactly where it belonged. Even the lanterns from the festival seemed to float invisibly just outside the window, faint glimmers bouncing along the edges of the glass. Passengers moved quietly, examining their new treasures with curiosity, reverence, and a touch of disbelief. Conversations, initially hesitant, began to bloom with philosophical weight. The storyteller from the early towns leaned toward a silent passenger, weaving an elaborate tale about a village that had existed only in dreams, while the child who had glimpsed everyone's future now hummed a melody no one recognized but all remembered. The traveler traced a finger along the music box's intricate patterns, recalling every twist and turn of the towns visited. They could almost feel the texture of the mirror streets beneath their fingertips again, and the carnival's laughter echoed faintly in their chest. Memories mingled, overlapping, colliding with new realizations. Some moments felt immediate, as if relived. Others felt distant, like echoes from another life entirely. A letter materialized on the tray table before them. It was old, the ink faded, yet perfectly legible. The handwriting was familiar. Yes, it was their own, though it had been written years ago and believed lost. Opening it revealed words they didn't quite remember writing. Hopes, fears, apologies, confessions. It was a message from a past self to the present, a reminder that even forgotten thoughts can find their way back when the world deems it necessary. Another passenger lifted a small toy from their lap. It was a carved figure, intricate and delicate, from some festival long past. Holding it, they whispered the name of someone long gone, someone they hadn't thought of in decades. And yet, the name felt alive, carrying warmth, carrying the weight of memory. The traveler leaned back, watching these small miracles unfold around them. Every object, every sound, every flicker of light seemed to have a purpose, a lesson woven into its presence. The train was no longer merely a vehicle. It had become a repository, a moving archive of the human experience, curated by some unseen force that understood the value of memory in its rawest, most unguarded form. A soft hum rose from beneath the floorboards, subtle but persistent. It was the same hum that had been felt in the misty forests and decaying amusement parks, a quiet vibration that seemed aware of the passengers' emotions. The hum deepened as passengers spoke, as stories intertwined, as connections formed. Some passengers spoke in whispers, sharing confessions and fears. Others laughed quietly, rediscovering joy they hadn't realized they had lost. The train seemed to respond, its pulse synchronizing with their hearts. The traveler turned to a fellow passenger, someone who had been quiet for most of the journey. "Do you feel it?" they asked. "Yes," the passenger replied. "It's as if the train knows us." "Or as if we know it," the traveler added, a thought forming with a clarity they hadn't expected. Perhaps both. They fell silent for a while, letting the train carry them. Outside, landscapes blurred in a gentle rush. Rolling hills, abandoned villages, streets lined with trees that seemed to bend toward the windows as if to watch. Yet nothing felt frightening. Everything was familiar, yet uncanny, comforting, yet strange. Every turn of the track seemed intentional, every sway meaningful. A sudden shimmer ran through the carriage. Objects that had been invisible moments before now gleamed in soft light. Letters written in vanished ink reappeared, toys resurfaced, and photographs long buried materialized in passengers' hands. Each item carried memory, each item carried choice. The traveler realized that nothing here was random. Every moment, every object, every encounter had been designed to illuminate something essential about themselves and the others aboard. Conversations deepened. Philosophical musings emerged spontaneously. The storyteller wove tales that connected the experiences of multiple passengers, linking memories from different towns into intricate tapestries. One passenger spoke of a festival they had long forgotten, and the images from the carousel and puppet shows emerged in the minds of those listening. The silent woman who had sketched faces earlier now drew in the air with light, creating ephemeral images that hovered briefly before dissolving, showing possible futures and alternate pasts. The traveler noticed subtle changes in the other passengers. They moved with newfound ease, carrying the weight of lessons learned rather than regrets. Their expressions, once tense or pensive, now held traces of serenity. Some laughed quietly to themselves, remembering moments of joy they hadn't realized they'd missed. Others stared out the windows, tears in their eyes, recognizing fleeting memories that now held new meaning. The conductor appeared, silent as always, their piercing eyes meeting each passenger with a nod. The traveler felt a mixture of awe and understanding. The conductor did not explain, did not instruct. They simply existed as the anchor of this journey, a silent witness to transformation. Their presence alone reinforced the sense that the journey was not about the destination, but about the change that occurred along the way. The traveler opened the journal from the festival town. Letters from friends long forgotten, sketches of moments never relived, pages of dreams postponed now seemed alive, pulsating with potential. They ran their fingers along the ink, feeling the weight of every decision, every choice they had made or avoided. In the quiet of the carriage, they realized that the true gift of the journey was the awareness that memory itself could be a guide, a teacher, and a companion. The train slowed again, fog thickening outside. The outlines of a station emerged through the mist, silent, enigmatic, entirely new. The traveler felt the familiar tug in their chest. Step onto the platform, and the journey would continue. Perhaps to another town, perhaps home, perhaps somewhere entirely unexpected. The final stop remained undisclosed, shrouded in uncertainty and possibility. Passengers rose, gathering their objects, memories, and reflections. They moved quietly, deliberately, aware that every action carried significance. Conversations shifted to whispers of what had been learned, what had been regained, and what could never be replaced. Connections deepened as passengers recognized fragments of themselves in one another. Small bonds, fleeting but profound, formed within the carriage, a network of shared understanding woven across time and memory. The traveler felt the train shift beneath them, as if acknowledging the passengers' growth. Tiny miracles continued. A letter that had been empty now contained new words. A toy that had been inert now hummed softly with life. A lost voice echoed clearly through the night, whispering advice, comfort, and recognition. Even objects from previous towns appeared briefly, each one highlighting lessons and choices made. Stepping toward the platform, the traveler glanced back at the passengers remaining on the train. Each face told a story of transformation, some bright with hope, others serene with acceptance, and a few contemplative, still learning how to reconcile their past. The realization came gently. The train was more than a journey. It was a crucible of memory and meaning, a vessel designed to reshape perception, to deepen understanding, and to reconnect each traveler with the fragments of themselves they had lost, ignored, or feared. The conductor reappeared at the front of the platform. Nodding silently, the traveler returned the nod, carrying within them relics, not just of places, but of understanding, the courage to confront memory, the wisdom to carry forward lessons, the strength to embrace joy and regret equally. The traveler stepped onto the fogged platform, uncertain whether it was home, another town, or a new layer of the journey entirely. Yet uncertainty no longer caused fear. Instead, it felt like possibility, as if the world had opened to infinite paths, each illuminated by the understanding they had gained. The train waited behind them, a vessel of moving wonder, humming softly. Each carriage held fragments of experience, objects from forgotten towns, reflections of choices, and echoes of the lives of those who had traveled before. The traveler understood now that the train did not simply transport passengers from one location to another. It transformed them. It showed them the weight and beauty of memory, the power of choice, and the depth of connection between lives, objects, and moments long forgotten. With the first light of dawn breaking through the mist, the traveler inhaled deeply, stepping forward onto the unknown. They felt simultaneously small and infinite, a singular presence within a continuum of experiences that spanned time, memory, and possibility. The journey had changed them, leaving them stronger, wiser, and profoundly aware of the delicate balance between past and future, memory and action, choice and consequence. As the train disappeared into fog behind them, the traveler realized the truth. Every journey ends, yet every journey is also a beginning. The train would wait for the next traveler, the next story, the next revelation, just as it had waited for them, and the traveler would continue, carrying with them the towns, the memories, and the lessons that had reshaped their very being. The station, silent and mysterious, offered no answers, only invitation. Step forward, and the journey, whatever form it might take next, would unfold. The traveler did.